What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, we're going to be talking about Invincible Iron Man number 14, written by Gerry Duggan, with art by Andrea DeVito and color by Brian Valenza. So last I talked about the Invincible Iron Man, one of the things I focused on primarily was what's going on with Riri Williams, aka Ironheart. I've said this ad nauseum, but for those who have not been keeping up, she does have possession of the Mandarin's 10 rings of power. In the previous issue, she came into contact with one of Fin Fang Foom's species, the Makluans. A Makluan who seemed to want the 10 rings that Riri now possesses. But something happens in this issue that I honestly never really even considered, and it's that this Makluan has no interest in taking the rings from Riri as it would initially have seemed in the previous issue. He's not there to even fight her. He's actually there to warn her about the rings and how they can tempt people into doing things they don't want to do and are very capable of corrupting even a person with the most altruistic intentions in using the rings. That the power within the rings is not a blessing, it's a curse. Even referring to the rings, saying that they're not 10 rings of power, that they're 10 rings of curses. The curses being those souls of those dead Makluans I mentioned in the previous issue. Having the 10 rings, no matter how much she has learned to control them, eventually at some point, they are going to make her go down a dark road that she's very likely not going to want to go down. And it doesn't even take long for Gerry Duggan to show us that she's already well on her way to getting there. Some would probably see some of her actions over the course of the past few issues she has appeared in Gerry Duggan's Invincible Iron Man series, and maybe just assume that those are actions that she probably would have taken anyway. And in a roundabout way, Riri is a very blunt, very snappy person. Like, I get it. I empathize with her as a person. I am constantly reminded by my friends and family that I am very snappy and very blunt with them. So I totally get it. But there is something to it now, and kind of makes me go back and look at some of the interactions that Riri has had as of late. Not to say they wouldn't have gone down the way that they ultimately did, but now it does kind of put some of those moments in a little bit of a different context. The fact that she just instantaneously jumped into a fight with Emma Frost. Granted, Emma Frost just kind of threw her into the fight, but just the fact that Riri never backed down or even thought to not mention some things that very easily would have probably thrown this whole fight out of the window. Granted, you could chalk that all up to the classic overused sacred cow in comics, the patented superhero misunderstanding, but it could also be said that maybe that was just her wanting to use the rings because the rings want to be used. One could make that argument. Even with how adamant she has been about keeping the rings for herself and not locking them away the way Tony initially told her to when he discovered that she was the one who had them. You can chalk a lot of that up to the fact that these rings probably are making her feel that way. She has more power now than she's ever had before in her life, and now she has an opportunity to make a choice with that power. And we see very quickly she can and does have the capacity to misuse the rings when both herself and the X-Man Forge travel to Nidavellir in order to use the dwarf's forge to create the massive amount of warships that are going to be needed to transport all of Arako's mutants to Earth to take the fight to Orcus once and for all. Which, by the way, it only takes them a few days in order to make this happen. But when the dwarves decide that they don't want to honor the original agreement in order for Forge and Riri to use their facility to make these ships, the dwarves would get whatever leftover Mysterium was laying around. But now they don't just want the leftover Mysterium, they want all the Mysterium. And in an effort to fight back against these dwarves, Riri unleashes the unbridled power of the Mandarin rings, unshackling what I can only describe as Cthulhu-like tentacles that are prepared to send each and every one of these dwarves to the void, something Riri ultimately does not do, only because Forge talked her out of it. But in this moment, we see very much like you, and we've seen other situations in the Marvel Comics universe recently where things like this are happening. Over on the X-Men Red side of things, we saw the Staff of Annihilation, as well as its prior incarnation, the Helm of Annihilation, do something very similar, where it manipulated the person wielding it and would often poison their mind in very much the same way that the Ring of Power from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings would do to anyone who wielded it. It would force them to want to use it. It would poison their mind. It would play on their psyche and trick them into doing all kinds of things that they probably would not have done otherwise. And Riri has one of those moments. She is about to kill people who, well, they did mean her harm. They were intending to kill her. It was something that just wasn't on brand for her as a character. So Forge is able to talk her down and show her that maybe she should get rid of the rings because they're pushing her in a direction that she's gonna regret later. And if anyone would be familiar with that level of regret, it would be a guy like Forge. And while one could also make the argument, and it is made here as well, that Tony Stark knows this all too well himself, being a guy who was originally an arms dealer before he initially threw out that whole way of life and became Iron Man. He was a guy who sold weapons to the highest bidder, but I think Forge probably feels this more than most because he developed a weapon for the government that was capable of robbing a mutant of their powers permanently. Now, granted, one of the most famous cases of this was in regards to the character Storm, a woman who would become his love interest, would eventually even come as close as you can possibly get to tying the knot without actually tying the knot. But eventually Storm would get her powers back, but it wasn't through any means of science. It took a lot of other things to make that happen. Forge has lived with that his entire life, and not even just what happened to Storm, but what has happened to other mutants who have been afflicted by something he created, something that could literally depower his entire species. That said, Forge has convinced Riri to get rid of the Mandarin rings, and for good reason. Because, clearly, whatever control she thinks she has over them, she doesn't have it. He uses what is effectively a cosmic sextant in order to send the rings out into the far-flung reaches of space and split them up. So we don't know when we'll see the Mandarin rings again, if ever, and if we do, who will be wielding them, we do not know. And honestly, I do feel like while this was probably the best choice for Riri in the scenario, I do feel a little bit bad about the fact that, there was story left on the table. I actually would have liked to have seen Riri try to overcome this. I feel this would give her something to, really latch onto and give her a powerful challenge to overcome. Granted, I think for the best, just because of everything going on right now and the fact that with Fall of X going on and her kind of being drugged into the X-Men's orbit on all this, kind of tying her story up in like what is arguably like a bunch of other crazy shit going on is probably not the best move. So if this were going on just completely in a vacuum away from anything related to the X-Men and like another crazy story arc that's going on, if this was just strictly something going on in, I would even dare say, not even in an Iron Man title, but like say if she was in her own title, I think then I would be more comfortable with the idea of allowing her this opportunity to try and overcome this on her own and not take these from her, take this opportunity from her to maybe turn something that was a weapon for evil, turn it into something good. I personally would have liked to have seen it. However, this is not my story, so I'm just going with it. Like I said, this is the best possible outcome considering all the circumstances before us right now. So it's a shame, but it is what it is. That said, getting over to the Tony side of things, Tony is dealing with his own issues as he has been for the last couple of issues or so. But in this one, we realize he is dealing with a recurring dream, one that is kind of funny to think about. The characters Iron Man and Magneto are not as intrinsically tied as some people might think, despite the fact that one character has mastery over magnetism, another one wears a metal suit. Iron Man and Magneto have crossed paths before, and more than a few times, but it's one of those situations I wonder what is making Tony have recurring memories of Magneto. Now, this could all just be set up for the fact that Magneto is about to make his triumphant return in the Resurrection of Magneto that is coming up here very soon. I don't think this has anything much to do with anything beyond that, honestly. I don't think there's any deeper meaning behind this other than that. If there's anything more to it than that, I feel like it doesn't involve Iron Man's death. I don't feel like Magneto would want to kill Iron Man if he's actively trying to help mutant kind in their hour of need, unless something really big is wrong. Beyond all that, we do know, based on what we saw in X-Men number 30, that Iron Man has been secretly meeting with Firestar to share war plans that both parties want leaked into Orchis so that they act in a way that they desire. And Firestar, as we learn in this issue, we see the fruits of her labor. While we do also see her interacting with Orchis in the X-Men number 30 issue, we don't really get to see the full picture of it. While we see that Moira and the rest of Orchis's petals are just lapping up everything that Firestar is selling them, the fact that the mutants are on the ropes, they're about to try one last ditch effort to try and stop them. Orchis doesn't really truly fully understand that they're being lulled into a trap because they believe that they have won. Kind of very similar to the same situation that the X-Men were in House of X. In House of X, when the X-Men got Krakoa and mutant kind had a safe space, they kind of got ahead of themselves and started to no longer look at the bigger picture and stop looking at the finer details. A big criticism of mutant kind during the early goings of that and this continued era. Well, Orchis is now in that position, committing the exact same mistakes. One of the things I find very interesting about this is, while Fei Long seems to be of the belief that he has Iron Man well and good under heel, Moira and Nimrod and Omega Sentinel, the AI component of Orchis, they don't see it that way. They agree with everything else that they are winning and that they are about to take the fight to mutant kind and wipe them off the face of the planet once and for all. The issue here, now that the humans have walked out of the equation and aren't around to hear their plans, we get a tease of what we saw in Rise of the Powers of 10 number 1, where the AI component of Orchis made it very clear they don't care about humanity and they are more than willing to sacrifice humanity to reach their goals. They want to become part of the Dominion. And this is why Moira and the gang wait until everyone else is gone to talk about the fact that they're going to send one of the X-Sentinels after Iron Man in an effort to kill him. I've actually talked about this. I believe this was in Jerry Duggan's X-Men number 22. But that was where we were first introduced to the X-Sentinels. These are Sentinels, human-sized Sentinels, or more specifically, Wolverine-sized Sentinels, all of whom are created from the corpses of Wolverine that have been just kind of left laying around. This isn't really news. This is really just Jerry Duggan reminding us of this, because this is already a plot point he told us about in his X-Men series. But he's bringing it up here just to kind of make sure that you don't forget what these things are. These are, for all intents and purposes, cybernetic Wolverines who act with Sentinel level impunity. It just so happens when they send this X-Sentinel after Iron Man, and in the next issue of Invincible Iron Man number 15, it seems Iron Man will likely have his Mysterium armor by this point. I don't think he's gonna have it for the whole issue. I feel like, just based because we've kind of seen the solicits, it seemed like they were saving this for issue number 17, but apparently it's gonna show up in 15. But I don't think it's gonna be something Iron Man has access to the entire issue. I feel like it's something we're only going to see towards the end of the issue, and then maybe see more of it in issue 16 and 17. But the Mysterium armor is ready. It looks awesome. I think it looks awesome. At least I'm very excited to see what this armor is going to be able to do that maybe some of his previous ones have not. He's been using the stealth armor for the last, let's see, maybe 7 or 8 some odd issues. And it's not an armor that's built for combat, even though he has been using it as such. That's not its primary function, so it's actually weaker than a lot of the armors he's used over the years. It's probably just barely a step above the original rescue armor that Pepper Potts used to use. And I would even dare say that's debatable maybe. The stealth armor is strictly made just for that. It has weapons, but they're not the most effective things, and they're definitely not going to be able to take down a Sentinel. It can't take down a big one, and I'd imagine even one of the X-Sentinels, a Wolverine-sized Sentinel, I don't think it's going to be able to take down that either, at least not permanently. But I'm curious to see how that all plays out, especially considering the cover those tees we're finally going to get to see maybe what War Machine has cooking over on his side of things. We know that he was given a pendant with an emblem very reminiscent of Iron Man armor on it, and I have a feeling we're going to get to see what Rhodey has gotten from Tony in regards to that necklace. I believe it is very likely like what we have talked about before, like with the Kingpin cane. These are all very likely just Iron Man armors waiting to be unleashed. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out. I love what's going on here. I love also seeing what's going on between Tony and Emma. I talked about this in the previous video that it seems like, yeah, they are hitting it off. It's coming together, even though, once again, marriage of convenience. It may not be love that they're experiencing between one another, but they're definitely feeling something. So I'm here for it. You guessed it, obligatory channel outro time. If you're not subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. Clicking that subscribe button and tapping that notification bell ensures that you get more videos just like this one, and you don't miss any of my other content that I drop throughout the week, plus my live streams every Thursday and Saturday. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you click that like button, keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.